Hey y'all! Well, today I'm going to go over Skunkie's streaming setup. And you long-term followers probably have seen videos of me talking about how vinyl just sounds so much better to me than any kind of digital or any kind of streaming or my CDs or anything, that the vinyl is just way better. And I've been in search of trying to figure out how to get a really nice sounding digital CD something set up, because I know it has to exist. And my vinyl setup, just for reference, is not a cheap system. It's got $1,000 phono preamp. It's got $1,000 worth of step-up transformers. It's got about $800 phono cartridge. The weak link, if anything, is probably the turntable. It's got the lowest tier Technics 100C turntable, which still is a pretty nice turntable, and it sounds really good. And I also bought one of those degritter vinyl cleaning machines so I can really get the most out of my vinyl. And I've invested a lot of money in buying new vinyl, some of this really nice Blue Note and higher end pressings, and some of those high quality, $100 records and whatever. And so, yeah, it's a pretty high level vinyl setup to be comparing to. And so, again, you folks probably know that earlier this year I bought a MICHI Q5 transport DAC setup, which is Rotel's top of the line CD player, and retails for about $7,000. So that's not a small investment either. But I heard it at several shows, and it always sounded good. And so I just decided to make the investment and buy one. And they sold me the one that they were using at the show up at Expona, and gave me a little discount for that, which made it a little easier pill to swallow. And I was right. My CDs now sound really amazing. I mean, I'd be hard pressed now to say that the vinyl sounds better than the CDs if you've got a good mastering. And now it's come down to, if the CD's mastered better than the vinyl, it's going to sound better. And if the vinyl's mastered better than the CD, it's going to sound better. So now that I've got my CD side of this sounding so good, I know that this DAC in this Q5 is doing what I want out of a source. That it's very musical, and it's just sounds really good. And so I know that's not a weak point. So now I got to figure out how to get streaming and local files into the DAC. And the DAC has optical in, has coax in, has USB in. And I know some folks are like, you have to use I2S. Well, that's not an option, and I'm fine with that. So I talked to some of my friends that are really into digital streaming, and there's potentially some other things we're going to be playing with in the future. But for now, I found something that I would say gets me 90% there and is very musical sounding, and I can sit back and listen to music off of streaming or local files, and it's not distracting like it's been in the past. In the past, I've tried a Bluesound Node, I've tried 3 different topping DACs, I've tried a Singzer reclocker that went between the USB source, which I was using a laptop at the time, into that topping Centaurus DAC that's a ladder DAC and all this stuff. And I was spending a lot of money on stuff that just, to me, I just couldn't enjoy listening to it. And so that gets back to my talk about wasting money. That's wasting money when you've got audio gear that you can't listen to because it just takes you out of the moment. And that's what I'm looking for, is something that sounds transparent and musical enough that I don't hear the gear, I'm listening to the music. So anyway, where are we at right now? And actually the first step of this process was in anticipation of going in a different direction, which I may play with in the future as well. And it was involving a couple of Raspberry Pis with this Doretta software installed on it, and the guy sent me a link to all of that stuff, and it's some really techie stuff. And I'm sure if you just sit down and follow every step of the way, you can get through it. But there was so much just command line stuff and, you know, tar balls and extracting and compiling stuff, and then paying a lot of money for this Doretta software and some other stuff that had to be licensed, and I wasn't ready to get down that rabbit hole. But the start of that setup was creating a Roon server out of one of these little, they call them a NUC box, and you see little boxes that they sell on Amazon. And this one is using the little Intel 150 chip, and I think they have them with i3s and other stuff. I don't know how compatible the Roon server software is with every box out there, you know, how platform specific it is. I know this little, I think it's an N150 chip Intel box works great. I'll put the specs down below what this box is, and I think it's been discontinued, unfortunately, and they replaced it with an i3 box, which maybe some of you guys can comment below if that even makes any difference, if Roon server runs fine on an i3 or whatever. But this is the one I chose, and it was about 280 bucks all in with a power supply and the whole deal. And it came with Windows 11 on it, and I didn't do anything except download the Roon server software and then burned it onto a thumb drive using the instructions that they have in the software that they recommend that you download. Some freeware you download, and it burns the installer onto a thumb drive. And I hooked up a keyboard and a monitor to install this stuff so I could see what was going on. And real simple, you just say yes, 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 you know, click Y on the keyboard to kind of go through the prompts, and it installs the Roon server software on this little box. And then at that point, this turns into like a headless unit. You don't need a keyboard, mouse, monitor, or anything hooked up to it. You just power it up and plug it into your network. So then you go to your router and open the router up on a web browser, and it will show you the devices that are connected to the network. And I told the router to assign this a fixed IP address so that it never changes, which I probably don't need to do, but I just did it anyway. And then I saw what the IP address, and it was like a 192.168.1.74. I don't know if they all just default to that, but anyway, then you can go back into the web browser, type that 192.168.1.74, and a little web page is served up by this guy that tells you what's going on with it. And it wanted some codecs installed, and so again, instructions on the Roon website, where to go find those codecs, how to extract those specific files, and then how to use your network to put the files in the right drive in the folder. That was the only thing that was kind of techie as far as setting up this little Roon server box. And then the other thing I did is this does have a little short slot for an M2 SATA drive, those little ones that look like a little piece of chewing gum, you know, the little small ones. And I put a 0.5 gig of extra capacity in here. You can't put your music on the main drive. The music has to go on a separate drive, which you could plug in to, say it's got a bunch of USB ports on the back and on the front. You can plug whatever you want into it. Thumb drives with music on it or whatever, and Roon just finds it, which is one of the cool things about Roon. And it instantly, when I rebooted this box after putting that M2 SATA drive in it, half a terabyte, it's like, hey, here it is. Do you want us to format it? Yeah, formatted it in that little window that you pull up on the web browser that you access, and it's all that GUI. It's a graphical interface. It's not command line stuff, which is nice. And then I was able to create a network share in Windows and just drop music in there, and Roon finds it and you can play it. So they're your local files. If you need more than a half terabyte, I'm not sure how big those M2 SATAs, because it's the smaller little 40 centimeter one. I don't know how big they make those, but I think they make them up to a terabyte. If you need more than that, like you can plug all kinds of external drives into this thing. That's not a problem. So that gets the music and gets the Roon server part of this thing set up in a low noise box that doesn't have a lot of other stuff going on. Now, you can set up a Roon server on any computer that's on the network, but people I was talking to said either buy one of their little Nucleus that's a pre-configured little mini computer, which I think are $800 or $1,000 now, or buy one of these little nut boxes, and if you're techie at all, you can figure out how to set one of these up. It's got one little tiny fan in it that I've never even heard run, and it's electrically really quiet because there's not a lot going on. I mean, the only thing it's doing is running this little small footprint Linux platform that's running the music server. And so it keeps all the massive electrical noise that's in a normal PC out of the equation. Now, one thing I haven't played with is trying a linear power supply with this. Might be something I try in the future, but for now, I'm happy with just the way this sounds. So the next piece of the puzzle was the endpoint. And first I tried just hooking this up directly to the DAC and ran a USB cable from this to the DAC because that's the only output that it has that's compatible. It doesn't have coax or optical. And so hooked the USB from this to the DAC, ran the Ethernet up from downstairs up there, and it sounded pretty good, but I thought I don't know. I just felt like it's got to be better than this, because there was a noticeable difference from, I took a CD that I've got that I know the music and it sounds really good, and I ripped that CD using a bit-for-bit CD ripper, saved it as a WAV file, put it on the drive, and even playing off of the drive in this box, or one connected to it, straight into the DAC without ever going through Ethernet, it didn't sound as good as the same file played off the CD. So I'm like, okay. It's the exact bit-for-bit same file, but somehow being electronically on this box versus being read off the CD, it doesn't sound as good. So I put this little box downstairs right next to the router with a little short Ethernet Cat6 cable, and then have the Ethernet cable running from the router up to the music room. And I first tried a little FiOS endpoint that one of the viewers said, hey, this is a big bang for your buck endpoint. And so it's like $120. And so I hooked it up, and it was an improvement over this box. And then the other thing I was able to try with that little FiOS box was I could try USB, could try coax, and tried optical. And of the three, coax sounded the best, which wasn't going to be an option with this directly hooked up. So we got some improvement there for whatever reason. I don't know whether, I'm not a computer engineer. Whatever reason, the coax sounded more musical. And I know there's limitations with coax that USB doesn't have over these super high res files, I'm fine. I want musical. And so we were able to then get this downstairs, had the Roon endpoint, which was the little FiOS box connected to the DAC via coax. We're starting to get somewhere. So I was talking to a friend of mine who been down this road for years, and he really likes this Auralic gear. And yes, I know they're out of business, but I'll get to that in a moment about why that's actually a good thing. So this was their original Auralic Fento box, I think they call it, and this was a bridge-only streamer. It was designed to do the same thing that little FiOS box was doing, of converting Ethernet to either USB coax or optical. And it's got its own software. It was designed to be run or controlled by an Apple, like an iPhone or an iPad. And Roon can also control it. And you don't have to use their Lightning DS software. You can, this is a fully, at least with the firmware that's in this, it's a fully Roon ready device that can be used as a Roon endpoint. And so, because they went out of business, and because that this Lightning DS software was an Apple only, and it's disappeared off Apple's Play Store because they went out of business, and Apple's like, well, there's no support, we're taking it off our Play Store, so you can't download it. Obviously, if you've already got it on your phone, you're fine, but there's no longer going to be any updates to that software. There's never going to be any more firmware updates, and people are panicking that own these things. This was a $1,600 bridge, and then the guy had bought this high-end Auralic linear power supply to go with it, which I don't know what this cost. It probably wasn't cheap. Let's just say it was $1,800 for the combo. It was on US Audio Mart for $200, and or maybe it was $250. I think I paid $250 all in shipped. And yes, this used was twice what that little FiOS box cost, but guys, this sounds really good. It made a noticeable difference using this as an endpoint. And it's also configurable by using a web browser on any computer on the network. You just, again, go to your router, find this device with its IP address, you type that IP address into your browser, and there's a multi-page website basically that gets served from this box over the network to your computer, and you can change whatever settings you want to change inside this thing. And I'm not sure if it's doing all of the features that it originally had if you're using the Lightning DS setup, but that's no longer an option. And again, that's why these things are like fire sale prices. And so, I mean, when this company was still in business, this same device would have been $1,200 used, and now they're less than a quarter of that. And so, definitely a high quality piece that was designed strictly for audio, made a nice improvement over what's considered a decent bridge of that little FiOS box. And so, the fact that it's better than that for just a little bit more money, and you're basically getting a $2,000 endpoint thing for a tenth of that price, definitely was something I jumped on. And so now I've got this hooked up to the router, which is the server. I've got this up in the listening room with an Ethernet cable running from the router up to this with this linear power supply. So the last piece of the puzzle was how to control all this and select music and all that stuff from the listening room. And like I said, the interface to Roon is just really great. And when you're on the desktop, everything's searchable. You could actually have like Tidal and Qobuz, if you have like multiple subscriptions, they're all cataloged in one place along with your local files. So if you've got a bunch of ripped files, or like I've got some music that I bought that are FLAC files that aren't streaming, that I bought from the artist, that are on a local drive, that they all get cataloged, and it makes it really easy to find the music. And it'll even show you like, oh, here's your local file, here's the streaming one, and here's the streaming one off this other service, and what bit rates they're at, and all that stuff. So you can choose which version you want to listen to, or listen to the different ones and see which one sounds better. You can play around with all that from the same interface. And it just really simplifies choosing music. And the other cool thing is it pulls up info about the artist and the album and their history, and like who was on the album. And then if you like, here's a guest singer, it's like, well, I really like her, you can click on that and it'll go over to her music. And I mean, it can send you down as deep a rabbit hole into experimenting with different kinds of music as you want, which I'm just starting to play with. But I really appreciate that part of this whole ecosystem, that it tells you about what you're listening to. So anyway, initially I tried doing it with their phone app, and while it's okay, it's not a replacement for their desktop app. The desktop app is just such a rich environment compared to what the phone app is, and there's settings and things that you can't change on the phone app that you have to use with the desktop app, which I understand. If you go to my Skunkie Designs website, there's a phone version and there's a web, or a desktop version, and they're not the same. And I'm sure that my desktop version is probably easier to navigate, and that's the same way it is with Roon. But once the screen size gets below a certain size, it just defaults to the whole phone app. And so I wanted something that was hand holdable, but that had that richer interface. So I have an older Yoga 14-inch, one of those really thin laptops that flips over and all that kind of stuff that I was trying to use to start with. And I was, instantly like, this is so much better than using my phone. But it was too big, and it just felt weird having to have a laptop in my music room. So Amazon to the rescue, found this Lenovo Tab One, I think it's called. It's this little guy right here, $135, and I basically uninstalled everything except Roon on it. Not going to have it connected. Even made its own Gmail account for this because I don't want to be tempted to be, having a ding in telling me to check emails and stuff. That's not why I'm up in that room. Or that's not why I'm listening to music, to be multitasking. I'm trying to get away from all of that. So it's got its own account. When you flip it open, here comes the interface. It does just like a phone. You can set it up to use the gesture navigation, and then you just click Roon. Once Roon's up, you can just leave Roon up. And then when you close that, the screen turns off. You set it over on the table. When you want to look at it, you just pick it up. When you flip it open, there's Roon, there's what's playing. And it's got the nice interface because it's an 8.7-inch screen. It's got the nice interface. And I looked at some of those 11-inch ones, and to me, they were just too big for what I wanted. And I wanted something, like I said, that's nice and, this seems to me kind of hand-holdable without being laptop-ish. And again, you can set it up however you want. If you want to be like reading emails and stuff while you're in your music room, you can do that. But I just created my own Roon Gmail account for this that isn't connected to my other ones, and it keeps me unplugged from the digital world. I don't want to be web browsing or anything. I mean, I left Chrome on here in case I want to look up an artist or something, but like I said, the Roon interface shows you all that stuff. So that was the final piece of the puzzle. Is now this is the controller for the setup. And so I'm really liking this streaming setup. And yeah, I don't have a quote streamer. That this and this bridge and then my Q5 DAC are doing all of the lifting. And at some point I may experiment with some different interface between this NUC and the DAC. But right now I'm liking this little Auralic thing for something that you can buy fairly reasonably right now on the used market. That's a really high-end piece, and I need to play around with maybe some of that other, Doretta kind of setup thing, or some of this other, endpoint strategy. But for now, for something that just plugs in, I'm really happy with the way this whole setup sounds and how it functions. And yes, you got to have a subscription to Roon. And that may be a deal breaker for some of you guys, but for me, that's such a minor cost compared to like the rest of what I've got invested in audio. I'm not worried about that. And it makes the interface so slick that I'll pay that for the price of entry into their system. So anyway, that's what we're doing for streaming now. And it's taken me a little while to kind of figure this out and get to this point. It's been absorbing a lot of my time in the last month or so of playing with this stuff. And I just wanted to share with you what I'm doing for streaming. And this is one of those things, there's 400 ways to skin the cat. And I'm sure in the comments that people will be talking about their setups and their systems. And that was one of the difficult things for me as someone that was new to all this, is every website you go to, every video you watch, every person you talk to is going to give you a different solution. And I've tried so many of those that didn't work, that where people were like, oh, just get that Bluesound Node X, that's just the bomb. And I hook it up and I'm just like, what are they talking about? This is not the bomb. And, I tried all these topping DACs that, measure fantastic, but to me, they're just not musical. And I think I found something that really challenges, especially that Q5 playing a CD. That really challenges my vinyl playback. And this setup gets me about 90% of the way there, which is pretty good for the convenience. And it may just be that convenience factor of streaming is never going to sound as good as a direct CD is going to. So anyway, hope you're enjoying this content. If you are, please subscribe to the channel. Please like the video. We normally do mostly tube audio gears, but I'm kind of branching out into different things with my audio room and streaming and different sources. And we've done some reel-to-reel stuff. And I keep saying the source has got to be right or the rest of the system is going to sound like garbage. And I finally got a digital source that I like. So anyway, that's going to wrap up this segment. And until the next video, have a nice day.